Over the past few days, you've been practicing crafting your own sounds using the samples you recorded, and as you continue to develop the song you're working on in this part of the class, I want you to start incorporating some synthesized sounds. So this is a video that I put together to get you up to speed on all the classic synthesizer functions. There are many things that are shared between different synthesizers. They might just have different names or different layouts or different combinations of these features, but a lot of the fundamentals can be applied anywhere, and they're super helpful to know because then you can shape the exact sounds that you want. We're going to be using the Helm plugin because it's free and cross-platform. I brought it up in an earlier lesson. It's got a really clean, clear layout, so it's great for learning on. I'll put the download link in the lesson notes if you didn't grab it earlier, but like I said, most of the concepts I'm going over will translate to almost any synth, so you can feel free to use another one if you have another one you like. So here is Helm. We've just got the default patch loaded up. So what we're going to talk about today is the oscillators. There are 3 oscillators plus a noise source. There's a mixer for the oscillators. There's a filter. There are then 3 envelopes for the amplitude, the filter, and then an assignable modulation envelope. And then you also have LFOs. An oscillator is just going to make a sound. It's going to oscillate, and it's going to oscillate at a regular frequency set by your keyboard key. You can click here to change the waveform of your oscillator, which will produce different timbres. So we have 2 oscillators here with identical sets of waveforms, and we can mix different ones together. At different levels. We can also transpose them independently, so maybe we want this one playing a 5th above. There's also a sub-oscillator with its own similar waveforms. So you can mix that into taste, and then there's also a noise source. And you don't get much control over that, but it's just a handy thing to add in slightly to some sounds to give them a bit more texture. Double-clicking most parameters will reset them to their default. The other common control on an oscillator is the fine tune. So transpose moves in semitones, whereas the fine tune moves in fractions of a cent being 1/100th of a semitone. Now let's turn the filter on. Here's where we can adjust the cutoff and the resonance. This filter also morphs between a low pass and a high pass. And you can choose between 12 and 24 decibels per octave curves, 24 being steeper. Clicking on SH, here we have a shelving EQ rather than a filter. And that gives you low, band, and high shelving. So the classic envelope has 4 stages, which are attack, decay, sustain, and release. You can see these here where they're marked ADSR. Attack sets the amount of time after you press a note that it takes to reach maximum volume. Helm even provides a really handy animation of this dot moving along the graph of the envelope. So as soon as the attack stage is over, it moves into the decay stage, which determines how long it takes to go from that volume to the sustain volume. In this case, I'm going to turn the sustain volume down because it's no different from the height of the attack volume. Let's reset our attack to be quicker. So as you can see, after our attack, it goes to the decay. The signal falls until it reaches the sustain volume. And we can make that decay shorter or longer. If we set our attack at 0, it's basically instantaneously going to the decay phase. So this is how you make like a plucky sound. Now wherever you put sustain, that is going to set the volume level that the note rests at for as long as you hold the key down, or as long as your MIDI note in your sequencer is being held. It's just gonna hang out there. And then the release time determines how long after you release the key that it takes for the volume to fall back to 0. So a release time of 0 means it's instantly off, and you can increase it so that it kind of fades away after you release a key. Now, taking those same principles, let's apply that to our filter. We have a filter envelope, and there's a control here that's really important. It sets the envelope depth. So I'm gonna turn that up to maximum. Now, if I turn our cutoff down, you'll start to hear the effect that that envelope has on the filter cutoff. We can have it rise a bit. We can have it not sustain. We could have it take a long time to rise and then sustain at full level. We could have a long release so that even after I let go of a note, it's still going to tail off for a while. Now with this envelope depth control, you can also invert the effect of the envelope. So this will be more pronounced if we have our cutoff starting from a higher point, and then our envelope is going to lower it rather than raising it like it was in our previous example. It's definitely more common to use a positive polarity envelope, the other way that we were doing before. So let's look at the mod envelope. Now this envelope isn't assigned to anything by default. The amplitude envelope is routed to the volume, the filter envelope is routed to the filter. The mod envelope isn't assigned to anything until you click this little button here, and then any of these highlighted green parameters you can assign it to by clicking on them and then dragging the amount, the depth of the modulation that you want. So I'm just gonna put this at maximum on the transposition of our first oscillator. We'll click that off. And we've got to turn oscillator 1 up. So now this envelope is controlling the pitch of our first oscillator. And if I want to adjust the depth of that, I will click that little wrench looking button again, adjust that, and now it doesn't go quite so high. And you can assign this mod envelope to tons of different stuff on this synthesizer. Maybe you also notice the filter and amplitude envelope also have a similar looking little wrench icon. So if you wanted to apply the exact same envelope that you're using on your filter to something else and have two parameters moving in tandem, that's an easy way to do that. And then you can still save your assignable mod envelope for other different shapes. And the final feature that I'll talk about is LFOs, which stands for low frequency oscillators. So these oscillators at the top that are making our sound are oscillating in the audible range, which for humans is generally 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. That's how many times these wave shapes are vibrating per second. Actually, you can see it up in this window here. If we change the waveform, the output up there changes. And if I play a note that's an octave higher than another note, so it's twice the frequency, you'll see that there are twice as many of those waveforms because they're vibrating twice as fast. So a low frequency oscillator is doing the same thing. It's just a wave that's moving up and down, but it's way slower. It's not audible. However, we can apply it, just like we did with the envelopes, to any of these parameters we've been looking at. So let's assign this LFO to our fine tuning of oscillator 1. And you can already see that it's moving in tandem with this wave. Now, if we play it, you can hear the pitch of that note moving up and down, coinciding with the shape of LFO1. And we can change the speed of this LFO. We can do tempo synced, we can do dotted rhythms, which is like 1.5 of a beat division. We can do triplets, and we can do seconds. So we can change the rate of our LFO freely. All right, so let's demonstrate some of this new knowledge and design some sounds. I'm gonna make two different sounds in front of you from scratch. We're gonna make a flute, and we're gonna make a nice deep 808. Pretty opposite sounds as far as the spectrum of instruments goes. So let's start with this flute. I think I'm gonna pick a slightly less harmonic rich waveform, like start with a triangle. Now a flute doesn't come in instantly. It's gotta breathe a little bit, so we'll put a little attack on it. We could also maybe give it a little bit of release. The tiniest bit of noise will mimic the breathiness of a flute. And then maybe we can slightly mix in a second waveform. I mean, that's pretty subtle. I don't know. Is it adding a bit of character? Really trying to find that perfect amount of attack. Well, that's pretty good. Now, what if over time we have a vibrato that grows on this note? Let's set this LFO to just free, not tempo synced. We will apply it in the same amount to the fine tuning of our oscillators, maybe around 20 cents-ish. Just dial in a natural amount of vibrato speed. But it's not typical for there to be vibrato right on a note. It kind of grows over time. So how would we do that? Well, let's reduce the amount of our LFO modulation and then assign our mod envelope to modulate the amount. And we'll set a long attack time so that the amount of modulation grows over time, and then it'll probably hold at that maximum level. So we'll increase the sustain of the modulation envelope, and now you can see the amplitude of this LFO, the dot there that's animating, growing as this attack stage rises. And maybe that's slightly too much modulation, so we could fix that in two ways. We could go back to this assignable mod envelope and reduce the amount of growth that will happen on this LFO's depth. And that's probably the easiest way. The other thing we could have done is change the amount that the LFO is sent to these two fine-tuning assignments. But not bad for a flute sound made in 5 minutes. Now let's delete this. Let's load up another blank preset. Let's make a sick, deep 808. Put my keyboard down a couple octaves. So let's see. First thing, I'm gonna make one of our oscillators a sine wave. Mix in another one just for a bit of buzz. Now we want it to have a bit of punch, so the sustain shouldn't be all the way up. We want the front end of the sound to have a bit more volume than the rest of it. And then this mod envelope is gonna be really important. I'm gonna assign that to the coarse tuning, maybe, sure, 25 semitones on both oscillators. We'll have sustain at 0 because we do want our original note to come into play. And then we'll adjust that decay to taste. Now, do we need some filtering? Maybe driving the filter. Bit of square wave sub is cool. And then modulating that filter with the filter envelope just a little. Ooh, sine wave sub is cool. Maybe triangle. I mean, we could keep playing with this forever just to dial in the exact character we would want for an 808 bass sound, but this is pretty cool. Run that through some Ableton distortion. So fun. Okay, so I hope this gave you a good crash course into the basics of synthesis. As you can see, there's a lot more on this plugin, but I just wanted to cover the stuff that is really essential in pretty much every synthesizer. Definitely, please poke around in whatever synth plugin you're using, adjust the different knobs and parameters. You can't break anything, just experiment. I hope this inspired some ways that you could work with creating your own sounds in your next song, which is what we're gonna be getting into next. The next lesson is all about how I would continue to develop a sample and synthesis-based track. I'll see you there.